In the latest crackdown towards women in Afghanistan, the Taliban has banned female students from private and public universities in the country. According to a letter by the Higher Education Minister, the Taliban has announced the closure of universities for women. The latest diktat further restricts women's access to formal education. The Taliban has already banned girls from middle school and high school. Women have been restricted from most employment. They've also been ordered to wear head-to-toe clothing in public. And just last month, women were also banned from parks and gyms. When the Taliban 2.0 came to power, it vowed to respect women's rights. But in the past few months, the group has widely implemented their strict interpretation of Islamic law. Meanwhile, condemning the move, the United Nations has called it another broken promise from the Taliban. Echoing similar concerns, the UN Special Envoy for Afghanistan said that the closure of high schools for women has undermined the Taliban administration's relationship with the international community.
What it is, it's clearly another broken promise from the Taliban. We have seen since their takeover, and also in the past months, just a lessening of the space for women, not only in education, but access to public areas, their non-participation in the public debate. It's another very troubling move.
The condemnation was swift from the United States as well. The US State Department said it will see what it can do to hold the Taliban accountable, especially after its latest diktat.
This unacceptable stance will have significant consequences for the Taliban and will further alienate the Taliban from the international community and deny them the legitimacy they desire. I do fully expect that we will continue to pull from the tools that we have at our disposal to hold the Taliban to account. Some senior members of the Taliban are already subject to certain measures.
Meanwhile, Pakistan's foreign minister voiced disappointment over the Taliban's ban on university education for women, but said that the best approach remained engagement with the Taliban. The university ban comes weeks after Afghan girls took their high school graduation exams. Thousands of girls had also sat for university entrance exams across Afghanistan, with many aspiring to choose teaching and medicine as careers. Well, for more on this, we're joined by Lynn O'Donnell, author and journalist. Lynn, many thanks for joining us. This is an awfully difficult situation in Afghanistan for women, and of course comes despite the Taliban saying that they would respect women's rights.
Well, I guess so, but anybody who believed that the Taliban would respect women's rights as we understand them was delusional. They always said they would respect women's rights within their own interpretation of Sharia law, yet they never said what that interpretation was. Harking back to the last time the Taliban were in power, in 1996 until 2001, this was exactly what happened. And it was always until further notice. Yesterday's notification from the ministry, the Taliban's so-called Ministry of Higher Education, says that women will be banned from universities, private and public, as you said, until further notice. Until further notice never comes. Now, the way the UN and the United States are now bleating about how awful it is, yet another broken promise, the Taliban have never kept any so-called promises that were contained in the Doha deal that the Trump administration did with the leadership in February 2020. There are no surprises here for anybody who knows anything about the Taliban's true nature.
Lynn, how do the international community deal with this situation? Because, of course, they want to express this disgust for the situation, but on the other hand, they don't want to alienate the Taliban. So how do they strike that balance?
Well, I don't really know what the definition of alienation is here. The Taliban are not recognised in any way diplomatically as the legitimate government of Afghanistan, and yet the United States sends a reported $40 million in cash per week into Afghanistan that is then distributed by the United Nations, ostensibly for humanitarian relief. As we know, things are pretty awful for ordinary Afghan people. There's no work, there's no food, they cannot access their bank accounts because of international financial sanctions on the banking system. And so people are very, very hungry and very miserable. There have been reports that people are giving their children tranquilizers so that they can sleep through hunger pains. Yet this money is not monitored. Tens of millions, as I said, going into Afghanistan to be distributed by organisations that are approved by the Taliban. And I have people in that system in Afghanistan who tell me that if 50% of that reaches the people who really need it, that would be a miracle. There's no oversight and there's no monitoring. And so what that essentially means is that while there are no consequences for the excesses of the Taliban, which aren't just aimed at women, they're also aimed at anybody who's perceived as an enemy, journalists, civil rights workers, people of other ethnicities than Sunni Pashtuns. So why would the Taliban change their behaviour if there are no consequences?
It's a very difficult situation. Lynn O'Donnell, author and journalist based in London, many thanks for your insights.
Thanks for having me.